Well, it's no secret that I am enjoying playing Arknights, but also I do enjoy the Arknight Endfield. But since I'm pretty much a new player and I want to know more about the lore, I came across Arknight lore that you need before Endfield. But overall, like, anything related to this game is freaking huge. So any kind of lore is pretty much welcome. Let's go.
Every time I get to talk about Arknights lore, I am so happy because I legitimately think it's one of the best stories I've read. And with Endfield coming out, I'm glad that even more people will show an interest in the lore of it, even if it's only to get context for stuff in Endfield, which is what this video is. Essentially, I want this video to be a quick, well, the word quick is relative, but I wanted it to be a quick
Well, anything related to the Arknights cannot be quick.
pick me up for the lore leading into Enfield for people that have not been able to get into Arknights, or who play it and don't have time to read the story that has a longer word count than if you were to read the Bible 3 times over. Now,
I'm literally 1 month into the Arknights, the tower defense game, and just seeing this giving me chills, like, quite literally. Okay, so we don't need to know that much lore, like, overall, that's actually good.
Wide range of explanations, there are naturally going to be spoilers for different events in this video. However, don't worry about that, because anytime I do go into spoilers, which most of the video is gonna be, I mean, like, come on, just look at the title, I will mark out what events and stories I am spoiling for Arknights, and when later I discuss Enfield's current story and my speculations about where the plot is heading in it, I will give out more warnings. Also to clarify, the information on what to explain is based on the story of the game from the second closed beta, which started November 28th. Now, I doubt the story is going to change much for the final release of the game, considering there isn't that much time for big sweeping changes, so I'm not worried about that.
Maybe there's gonna be someone a little bit more educated. Just let me know if there is such a huge difference between the second beta and the current release.
The only reason I bring this up is to preface that this is the starter explanation, pretty much. Because the future updates like 1.1 or whatever bring up more story that relates back to Arknights, like faction name drops or whatever. This video will not be going into that. I'm just here to give the prep work and maybe make you a bit more interested in trying out Arknights after you've enjoyed Enfield. Basically, I just don't want you to feel lost going into Enfield if you haven't played the original like other people have. So this is my best attempt to cover what I think the story will go into, so when these plot points from Arknights are brought into Enfield, you'll have the context of it. And to be honest, that's a bit of a lie. I'm just here because I like ranting about the lore like a crazy person.
I feel like as far as I've seen, like overall, there is not that much content related to the Arknights like overall, because let's be real, there's gonna be probably some really interesting clutches when it comes to tower defense, but when it comes to the Endfield, okay, now we're getting some endgame content, but like overall, what I've seen the most was basically like factory building map and the blueprints, which, don't get me wrong, I wouldn't even mind to playing Arknight Endfield just for the factory. It's really entertaining.
But this crazy person was also able to have this video sponsored by Hypergryph, the creators of Enfield. So thank you
what
to
a lucky
Hypergryph for
guy.
sponsoring this video, and with all of that out of the way, let's talk about the lore.
It's a beautiful music. Is it from the Arknight?
Arknights is, as a story, definitely multifaceted. You have stories of people seeking the future no matter the cost. One of someone's lone journey throughout the world and a desperate hope to save it. Others take an influence in their storytelling and changing their narrative style to be similar to the storytelling of the region they're based on, like some of the Sui events emulating a narrative style like Chinese folklore, or another focusing on fairies and fantasy to be more similar to Irish or European folklore. And then you have some that are stories of a logistics company owned by a talking penguin, or a slice of life in what is undeniably one of the worst places in the world to live.
Is this
to
from
really
anime?
Bottle the stories in Arknights to one particular saying would be difficult. But what I think a lot of them revolve around is, no one should be able to judge the value of human life. Everyone deserves the ability to survive. And this plot point is integral to both Arknights, Enfield, and probably many future projects within the Arknights world. Now, the full reason as to why this is important will be discussed later in this video, but also definitely in the endgame of Enfield's story. Honestly, I have a lot of thoughts about how that'll play out myself, but the first thing I want to lay out for the people who don't know the lore is the setting for Enfield. Now, the explanation on its own doesn't have any spoilers for Arknights. Further explaining how the setting came to be is where it is, but the basics are no worry.
Honestly, like 3 minutes in, and I can definitely tell what the guy said. Like, he likes to yap a lot, which, like, don't get me wrong. If I know more about the Arknight, I would probably do the same
The
thing.
story of Arknights takes place on Terra. This is the world map of it. Now, off in the north, past the Endfield ice fields, there is a portal. Don't question why it's there. And this is the portal that teleports the Terrans to the planet Endfield takes place on, Talos 2. Well, actually, it's a moon of Talos if we're being particular. Now, for reasons we'll talk about later, the portal is pretty much the only way for Terrans to get to Talos 2. However, during the events of Arknights, the portal, called the Stargate, doesn't work. But some years in the future, the Terrans are able to open it during an operation done under Rhodes Island's oversight.
Guys, please tell me this is from the anime. Guys, please tell me this is from the anime series. I hope this is true because I genuinely want to watch it.
Then they take the wormhole to Talos 2, and 5 years after that, the portal was cut off and the people in Talos 2 have not been able to reach it. That is the current situation. All in all, a pretty rough one. The people on Talos 2 are left to fend for themselves on this unknown planet. Now, a positive of that has been that diplomatic relationships on Talos 2 have generally seemed more cordial than they were on Terra. I mean, sure, they nearly had a civil war in the past, but only having one war between themselves in 152 years is still doing considerably better than Terra. Now, granted, they do also need to contend with Agaloy fighting against them constantly, the Bone Crushers, and the Blight that erases all life and information links, so, they're not doing much better. In fact, you could very well say the situation on Talos 2 is getting more dire as time passes. It really seems like the very planet is fighting against the Terrans, not within the sense that the planet is sentient or whatever, but within the idea that it is incredibly hard to inhabit. Endfield is very much a story about life surviving and thriving on that new planet, but now the question...
I actually like kinda wondering, knowing a little bit about the Arknight, the literal civilization or like the entire lore of the Arknight, there are so many wars, there's so many conflicts and stuff. I wonder if we happen to like get into some like really huge battle or the war like within Arknight Endfield. Because let's be real, like knowing more and more about the Arknight's like universe, I wouldn't be like shocked if that's gonna be happening.
Why was there a portal on Terra that led to Talos 2? The technology on Terra isn't exactly backwater, but they're not really a civilization that has the ability to just make a wormhole out of nowhere. And not to mention, why was there also one on Talos 2, a planet countless light years away? Well, that is where these spoilers come up. The explanation contains spoilers for the Babel event in Arknights and Lone Trail. Now, to be clear, this story plot point is one that spoils those events, and I would say specifically those. Because even though Babel is a part of the main story of Arknights, I wouldn't say explaining these spoilers ruin chapters 0 to 13 that you would naturally read before Babel. Because the reunion arc and the Londinium War to a certain extent, and pretty much all chapters except for the last one, don't really touch on this plot point, just give foreshadowing to it. You can very much treat what I'm about to explain as the lead-in for later stories of Arknights, but not a spoiler of all these stories that came before, just the ones I have marked out. So with that explanation, if you don't want to be spoiled on these two events, skip to here. Later when I get into spoilers,
so basically like skip the entire video.
That can spoil other events, I'll give out another warning, so don't worry. But the reason why the portal in the Infi ice fields exists and why it goes to Talos 2 specifically is because it is a lifeline, a survival method. Not from anything specifically on Terra, but what exists out there in the universe, the observers. Now, to y'all who checked out my Arknights Limbus collab video, you'll notice I'm explaining some similar plot points between these videos, but it comes with the territory of explaining the main conflict. Though I will say, if after this video you want to learn more about Arknights, then I can recommend it because this is focused on explaining the why of the plot points that I think are likely to reappear in Endfield and showing the weight of them in Arknights. But that video is, even though it's for the Limbus collab, focused on explaining the morality and philosophy of Arknights. Though before explaining the observers, I want to talk about the history of Terra briefly. See, at one point it was just a regular planet in the galaxy, and the only race living on it were the Tikas, until the predecessors came to it. They're a tier 3 civilization that could travel throughout the stars, the Doctor is one of them, and thousands of years before the time of Arknights as we know it, the predecessors brought life to Terra.
It's actually interesting that he said the Doctor was basically one of them. Like how many people were there? Like do we have this kind of information? Because today I did the reaction to the second part of the Arknight lore that I need, and there was a mention some priestess, but basically like these two characters. I don't remember mentioning like anyone else, so like how many people are there?
Aside from the Tikals who were already native to it and would later become either the Sarkaz or Sanctum. But the predecessors are the reason why the animal races
Yeah,
in the
these
game
two.
exist. They brought them to Terra and are the reason why they look human. But these
Also, why the doctor like looks so badass here? Like obviously he got a cape, right?
forms originally came with the predecessors from Talos too. The reason they decided to land on Terra was to prepare against the threat of the Observers. And really the only explanation I can give of the Observers that makes sense is the one the Doctor gave before their amnesia. They equate civilizations and their growth, schemes, machinations, triumphs, and glory all to a tranquil forest, where a tree represents a world or a collection of planets all host to the same civilization. That tree represents all of its people on it. And in this forest, the predecessors are also just a tree, and the observers are the lumberjack. The trees do not know the origin of this lumberjack, do not know why it cuts them down, but they can do nothing to stop it. That is the
sounds kind of
difference between
sad.
them.
A
We
little
do
bit
not know what
depressing.
the observers are. We do not know why they do what they do. We just know that even though the predecessors have technology that can have them travel throughout the universe, they view the difference between them and the observers as they are the lumberjack and the predecessors. Hell, every civilization in the universe are the tree. Equating it to cosmic horror might not even be that far off the mark, because the observers are not explained as a threat you can fight and win against. They are something you run and hope to survive against. The predecessors did not go to Terra to win against the observers. They went there to survive by any means necessary. But then the question is asked, if the observers are such a big threat, why did it take so long for them to be mentioned in the story? I'm pretty sure the first time they were specifically mentioned, not just foreshadowed because that happened year one of the game with Astasia's operator profile, amongst other things, but the first time they were mentioned specifically in the story was the Lone Trail event, and that was 4 years into the game. And why aren't the predecessors talked about often as well?
Kinda knowing this like 4 years after the game, I would say concerned, or like I'm a little bit scared that I happen to like get like too much attached to the game and the lore and stuff. And this gonna become like a literally lifetime journey, you know, like waiting another decade for more information, more lore, or perhaps a new game that will finally reveal another lore. I'm kind of having a feeling this could be the case, you know what I mean? Like the world and like universe is so vast, so large in this game that I could see this literally as a lifetime project, like literally. Well, I hope that's not
And the
gonna be the
answer is
case.
because the observers already came to Terra and wiped out most of the predecessors. That's why Arknights as a story isn't based around this big cosmic threat all the time. It's focused foremost on very human stories, but the threat of the observers is still appearing to be the endgame of the story. Not to beat them, but the question about how the people on Terra can survive them. Especially considering how they seem to be infatuated with consistently fighting each other instead of actually unifying against the threat. But
This blows my mind. Every time I heard, saw, or read some kind of factions or the nations, like there is always war. Like everyone is so fucking greedy. Everyone wants to dominate. Everyone wants to conquer. Everyone wants their fucking power. Nobody wants to thrive. At least like everyone wants to thrive, but alone.
thankfully for them, the experiments the predecessors did to try and survive, even though it didn't end up saving them, ended up helping the Terrans survive. And some ended up murdering a considerable amount of them, but that's something we'll have to talk about on a different day because it doesn't relate back to Endfield. That we know, as of now. So the plans the predecessors had that I'll be talking about are the Preserver Project, Starpod, Stargate, and Originium. First up is a Stargate, as that is what leads into Endfield. So the portal that goes to Talos 2 was created by the predecessors as an escape plan to use before the Observers came. But the Observers arrived much earlier than anticipated, so it couldn't be finished. As a result, Collapsals arrived through the Stargate, and they are kinda pretty damn scary. The reason as to why most people in Terra don't know about the Stargate or go to it now is largely in part because of the Collapsals. The fact it's like 20 million miles up north, it doesn't really help much either, but the
Actually, that was a good question. I think I haven't seen this information yet, but like seeing the overall world, I would like to see like comparison to our world, like how big, or like if this, I assume this is gonna be like way bigger than the Earth, right?
Capsules are a pretty big reason. Now, to put it briefly, not much about them is known, but what we do know is they have exhibited a certain degree of reality warping and space-time manipulation. So when you're in contact with them, the world simply doesn't function how it should. We also know they don't need to hunt for food or a need to eat. They're just incredibly aggressive regardless
Okay,
of
this
that.
is terrible.
They've been known to cause the total loss
This is
of
like
a person's
terrifying.
ego and emotion. They're capable of mind control, hallucinations, mirages, and once someone succumbs to them, they become incredibly violent and are able to infect others with this as well. However, they seem to be unable
10
to
times
interact
more
with the world
terrifying.
unless they are being observed. But this comes as a double-edged blade because knowledge about them and emotions, such as fear, in turn power them. So most knowledge about them is heavily restricted. Humanity has been able to fight against them. For example, all major nations on Terra have one incredibly elite fighting force. For Victoria, it's the Steam Knights, Ursus the Emperor's Blades, and
who is this
Laterano the
dude?
Apostolic Gun Knights. And the ones fighting against the Collapsos in the north have been the Emperor's Blades from
I mean, I'm sorry, but if I'm not gonna have this fucking character in the game, I'm gonna be so disappointed. This looks
the Emperor's Blades
amazing.
and Laterano the Apostolic Gun Knights. And the ones fighting against the Collapsos in the north have been the Emperor's Blades from Ursus,
Saving
Snow
all
Priest
my
from
pulls.
Sami, Tianchi from Yan, and Wendigos, though they face extinction soon. But the reason I bring this up is because Collapsos come from an interdimensional space that does overlap, albeit partially, with real space, and it's known as the Ether Side. Or Aether Side, really, which other one? Now in Arknights the word Ether Side is actually barely mentioned, I'm pretty sure. It's only really in the forefront for Endfield, but there are some connections you can make in Endfield to the Collapsos that seem like it's very likely they're present in it. Now, I'm going to link a Reddit post in the description that I'm pretty sure is where this theory came from, but if not, it is definitely the best source of information about it. Now, there are some obvious things like, since the Collapsos came from the Stargate, of course there's a possibility they'll come through the one on Talos too as well. Even if the people on Terra eradicated the ones in the north similar to how the ones down south in the Hotlands got clapped, from what we know, the ones on Terra are very likely just the vanguard for their forces. So I doubt many efforts on Terra would make the possibility of them appearing on Talos 2 zero, especially considering the state of the Stargate in the north is currently unknown in Talos 2. But then another point of the theory is in Levitane's operator profile. Demons are mentioned a lot, and it's confirmed later on in that profile that demons was an archaic term for describing aethermorphs, which are aether-side organisms or entities. And in A Walk in the Dust, Kelshi brings up the term demon in explanation and concern for the Emperor's Blade, as they are super soldiers created by Ursus that use the corruption of the Collapsos. Now, this next point has spoilers.
Honestly, I feel like I need to take a break and rewind like last 5 minutes because like I'm having a hole to my brain. I kinda wanted to check that Reddit post, but I think I'm not gonna do it. The ridiculous amount of theory crafting in Arknights. Well, how can I put it? If I value my time at least a tiny bit, I should probably avoid it.
From Im Herbst, which, listen, I know it's German, I know I butchered that, but I tried my best and I think that's really the only important thing here. But skip to here if you do not want to be spoiled on it. So the Witch King, who is basically the strongest arts caster on Terra, and it's
Yo,
not
this dude
really
looks
even
dope.
close, dedicated his life to uncovering more about the realm the Collapsos come from, and later into his studies, after learning more of the truths about Terra, went insane due to the revelations he found. This led to him becoming a dictator in Lethania, the country he ruled over. And due to his cruelty after losing his mind, he was overthrown and killed, but through his arts, he made his soul go to the realm of the Collapsos, which he called Kargereich. I know, I fucked it up again. It means desolate domain in Lethanian. Moving on. Now, with the Witch King being the greatest caster in the history of Terra, he was only able to carve out a small pavilion in that realm against the Collapsos. He only made a tiny, volatile bubble in an infinite void.
Guys, I really need to know if there is someone who's watching my video and literally or genuinely play the Arknight and read the, let's say, entire content. Let's say I want to do the same thing, like how long, like genuinely, it's gonna take me to go from basically like zero to the very current content. Just please be honest with me. Is it going to be at least like within like under 1 year? Am I gonna finish the Arknight till I retire?
But the importance of this is that he was able to resist the Collapsos moving more into Terra. But one other thing he might have been able to stop happening on Terra is the Blight. Now the Blight is an Endfield. It erases all life and information links and it comes from the Ether side. So if the Desolate Domain and the Aether Side are one and the same, the pavilion the Witch King made is why Terra didn't have the blight problem that Talos 2 does. Basically, if the theory is correct, he was the stopgap against the Collapsos doing whatever they wanted to in Terra. But if this is true, it also means there's no one in Talos 2 who's defending against the bulk of the Collapsal forces, so if they are in Endfield, their showing will be a lot more intense than anything in Terra. Basically, the theory is, the Witch King called the realm of the Collapsals the Desolate Domain, and if this is the same as what the Aether Side in Endfield is, it means Endfield will deal with the Collapsals later in its story. Now, this theory isn't exactly bulletproof, the Lincoln Bournes of the characters referring to Collapsals as demons and the portals being in play. But I mean, in Arknights the word demon is only used a few times, and where it's only used as a name are against the Collapsals, including all of In Hero People Souls, where the defensive line against the Collapsals is called the Demon Defense Line. Yeah, Arknights is very particular about their wording, so if I'm putting money on them becoming a plot point in Endfield, I'm putting down a lot. But that's the explanation of the Stargate and the theory that the Collapsals will appear in Endfield. To talk about the other plans the predecessors had, let's talk about the Preserver Project and the Star Pod, as these
I actually just got a random thought when it comes to the Arknight like Endfield. Like, I know the game is technically not open world, but like knowing the lore and like how we basically going with the story and like we basically like scratched the like very surface, right? We barely started. Like hearing the recent lore, I'm actually like wondering how far we can actually expand the world. Because yeah, it might not gonna be open world game, but I feel like if we're gonna follow up the story rather well, the in-game map should be like insanely huge. And the characters. Arknights overall having so many really cool and interesting characters. I know we barely like started the game, but I'm like already excited to see like what 2.0 is gonna bring to the table.
show the more imminent threat around the world and what Talos 2 is under as well. The Preserver Project was a strategy the predecessors had where they would, well, preserve their bodies in sarcophagi to avoid the observers until a time came where they could rebuild their civilization, as this was after the observers' attack that nearly wiped them all out. But to see this project fully realized, they needed a preserver to look over the sarcophagi and wake them up at the right time. They basically needed a guardian angel who would be responsible for saving their civilization. But they couldn't just make the preserver an AI, as they were worried the observers could take it over if so, and a person wouldn't do because their body would wither away with time. So they decided to upload the consciousness of a predecessor to make them an organic AI, and Trevor Friston volunteered for that role. He spent the
And that's the moment when everything went wrong.
next 13,000 years alone in a cave far underground, watching over his civilization in hopes to save them. The entire time broadcasting signals to space in hopes other predecessors would hear, but he never got a single response. And as time passed on, as the
That's crazy, 13,000 years?
To endure 13,000 years alone, he starts to notice the vital signs of the predecessors start to fade, with no hope for his civilization in sight. Around the same time, Christine Wright wishes to uncover a secret on Terra, why the stars are always shifting. You see, the sky of Terra is weird. Astrology hardly works as a science because there's not many constants with the stars you can observe on Terra, and even more weirdly, any spacecraft or vehicle capable of flight always starts to fail at around 6,000 or 7,000 meters above ground level. This made it so the people on Terra never looked into the universe or thought about traveling the stars.
Why I low-key feel like this is intentional. This genuinely looks like a very perfect and profound design to like keep some people like under control. Am I crazy or am I like already theory crafting a little bit?
To them, the word universe doesn't even exist. They cannot fathom what that means. Not for a lack of technology, they certainly have the ability to make spacecrafts, but because this invisible barrier shut down any attempts to travel at high altitudes. And Christine Wright's parents died in a plane crash due to this fact. So she dedicated her life to uncovering why that's the case, and as a result, found the cave where the Preserver Project was taking place. Asking Trevor Friston about everything, about why this all came to be, she got some answers. That the barrier in the sky is called the Star Pod, and it was made as a way to shield Terra from the observers due to the worry that they will attack again. That's why the stars are always shifting and objects aren't able to pierce it. It acts as the greatest restriction to Terra, but also the main protector of it. It's a veil to hide what is happening on Terra, as the threat in the stars far outweighs any benefit of traveling through them. And this gave extra time for two other plans of survival to come to fruition. But after Christine spent 2 years learning about the situation with the Star Pod and why it came to be, her ideals never wavered. Even after learning the truth of the world, about the observers, about Terra, truths that drove the Witch King to madness, she never lost sight of her goal. Because of this, she asked Friston if he could reroute the power of the sarcophagi to make a beam capable of splitting open the barrier. As if we ignore the energy of the sarcophagi, it would take an immeasurable amount of energy to pierce the star pod. It would basically be impossible, which was by design. Because such an act is equivalent to signing
did
the
they
death
actually
certificate
succeed?
of Terra. If the sky is split open and the people can see the universe for the first time, the observers can also see them. And
I think that, like, even though there's gonna be probably another bloodbath, I think Loki would be kinda cool. I mean, let's be real. If there is something that is definitely not gonna be avoidable, is war, blood, and tears. Opening a little bit gap to see what brings the future. I mean,
if
why
they
not?
decide, though it's not like we know what makes them decide to take action, to wipe out all life on Terra, there is nothing they can do, in their present state, to survive. Due to the years eating away at Friston and the ever-creeping reality that his civilization will wither away in the sarcophagi before having a chance of survival, he agrees to the plan. But knowing the risks of it, he asks Christine,
Christine,
Say your piece.
after knowing all of this, do you still intend on gambling with your life to tear open the sky? Terra is ill prepared, and your death will be without meaning or reason.
I don't know, like, this echo is giving me chills. Like, if I'm in her position, maybe I'm gonna be like, you know what, never mind.
Allow me to ask you a final question
Ooh.
to serve as my answer.
Ask your question.
Our careers, cities, homes, art, as well as our cruel history, suffering, war, catastrophes, and the arrogance that destroys everything. Trends of thought and ideals. Greatness granted by others and equality gifted from birth. The civilization born on this tiny patch of wilderness, and everything that we have ever loved without compare. What do they inevitably mean? And what is it that life ultimately seeks?
Ooh. That's a deep question.
the answer is the future. If life on Terra is going to evolve, then this is the push they need. So she follows through with her plan, aiming the beam against the star pod, and in a showing that almost the entirety of Terra can witness, from the Seaborn in Iberia, the musicians in Laterano, the nobles of Victoria, all see Christine Wright tear open the sky and show Terra that they have been living in a protected bubble surrounded by an incomprehensible universe. She launches her shuttle into space through the opening she made and quickly runs out of power for it. Drifting in space, she starts the status chamber and records one final message, a good night to Terra, before she is lost in space for countless years. Lone Trail is widely seen as one of the best stories in Arknights, for good reason. It was basically the turning point of the plot. This is what first revealed the major conflict of the story, and how it relates to Endfield is that Terra's on a timer. We don't know how long this timer is, we don't know when they'll face extinction, but we know they need a plan to survive the observers because they cannot fight against them and win. So her actions, making Terra aware of the threat, is what was probably a driving factor in the project to get to and start opening the portal to Talos 2. Given time, it would have happened eventually, but her showing Terra that they are not ready for what is out there, that was the push they needed. But another thing is that the star pod does not exist on Talos 2, within most areas. There is something similar in the northern polar region and in some other specific places, but it's not enveloping the entirety of it. So with Talos 2 not having a veil like Terra does, and Terra's veil opening for a time but self-repairing after some years pass, it's getting more and more likely that the observers are going to be a major threat for Talos 2 or Terra. If the portal is a means to help save life on either of those planets by traveling to the other, like an escape plan, then it currently being out of commission is reason to be terrified. As with that, Endfield shifts from a planet banding together to survive to a, well, planet banding together to survive with a doomsday clock hanging over their heads. Now,
I mean, so far it more feels like, at least to me, it giving me the vibes that some like huge corporation like settled down and like starting to building the entire infrastructure and the industry to just like take over pretty much everything living under the sun. Also, I'm not quite sure if we happen to know a little bit more about the observers, or if we even encounter. Maybe I haven't got too much into the story, but like to my knowledge we didn't. But like seeing the technology, the information that we already have, and like building such a like wholesome cities and stuff with a pretty sizable technology. Also in the game we can see a lot of like tower defense kind of mechanism and like weapons, which makes me wonder, like, can we actually create something like really huge, meaningful, that we can actually like stand a chance against the observers? Maybe I just refuse to believe that with the technology we cannot came with some really profound idea how to fight back. Or maybe the observers are literally like a godlike features.
Reality, I don't believe the observers are just going to pop up out of nowhere, but I think there'll inevitably be a future conflict, and the lack of a star pod is even more fuel to that fire Talos 2 has to deal with, whilst Terra is mainly dealing with the fire of Priestess and Originium. Which, on that note, time to talk more specifically about Endfield, and mainly the Endmin. Man, I gotta say, that name is still gonna take some time to get used to. But this point is going to get more into the weeds of a later plot revelation at the end of Valley 4 and Endfield. Valley 4 is the first region to go through. This is just one line and definitely doesn't spoil the entirety of Valley 4. In fact, it's pretty obvious this is the case before the story states it plainly, but I just want to give out a heads up in case. Though what I will be discussing about it also travels into Chapter 15 spoilers for Arknights, so if you don't want to be spoiled for either of those, then skip to here. But at the end of Valley 4, Neferth calls the Administrator, the main character, Child of Originium. In case
That's
you don't know
true.
what that is, it's the rocks that are the cause of many disasters in Terra. They've resulted in catastrophes forming.
Honestly, I didn't even pay that much attention to, because like he was like his ult and stuff is like related to the Originium, right? But like later on the other villain, I don't remember the name, like he was approaching the Endman as well and like kinda wanted to join the forces. So I wonder if this is gonna be like somehow related, or if they know something that we obviously
People
don't know
becoming
yet.
infected and so much death. But it was originally made as a way to save humanity, another plan of the predecessors, though the two specific ones who made this plan were Priestess and the Doctor. Before Terran civilization came to be, the two of them debated heavily on what they could do to survive, and the results of this debate came to form Originium. It may just look like a rock, but what it's capable of doing, what its purpose was, is to store information. It can store vast amounts of information, and inside of Originium can create an assimilated universe.
I feel like I actually heard that like thanks to this like technology, we will probably have a lot of characters from the Arknights, which was basically like one of the reasons why I decided to try this tower defense game, and by a huge accident I actually got addicted. But to be completely honest, I don't even know if I wanna mess around with like simulation or like multiverse, because Arknight overall is like really deep, and like adding extra layer to it, it would be kind of huge headache.
The idea was to assimilate civilization into Originium so they could escape the observers and survive. But there was a rift in how the Doctor and Priestess viewed this project. Priestess wanted all of civilization, in its entirety, to be consumed by Originium, even if people did not want to be consumed by it. Basically
Okay.
signing them to die by Originium, but having the information of their civilization live on instead of being wiped out. While the Doctor had a more reserved approach than what Priestess suggested. They knew the benefit it provided, that it may just be their only chance to live, but they were hesitant on subjecting all of Terra to be consumed by Originium. On one hand, if it is, they will survive the observers, but on the other, if you just survive as information, can that be called living? Now, without going into a lot of the thought process,
This is actually like really interesting, because like from this perspective I kind of feel like the Priestess is probably gonna be seen as a like a bad person, and maybe the Administrator or the Doctor a little bit more like a, you know, human-like being, basically pretty much being like a pro-life, while the Priestess is kind of like a pro-survival, maybe like a evolution, which to be honest I would probably be on her side in a way. Like knowing the history and stuff, I mean, it kind of feels like a pretty decent gameplay, I
how
would
the
say.
Doctor was in babble about this, in their current state, we don't have a 100% definitive answer about what they want Originium to do, but we do know that the Doctor is against Priestess. Now, this brings in some interesting questions. Like, if the Endman is called Child of Originium, that means it's likely to be the case that either Priestess or the Doctor created them. Now, the answer as to which one is still up in the air. Definitely a lot more likely the Doctor would be
Who's
the
the
creator
mother
of the
of
two of them, as
Originium?
there are theories floating around that the Endman
That's
was
the better
created as
question.
another body for the Doctor, and the close cooperation of Rhodes Island with them only adds to that. But that Child of Originium line holds a lot of importance for the future of the plot, just like the Reconveners. It's the way they bring back older operators, but how it's done is also through Originium, where the information of them is brought into real space. So information of characters from Arknights can, through Originium, become people in the world of Talos too. They're different people fundamentally, they just got some memories of the person they, in a sense, used to be. But since Endfield takes place, I don't think we know precisely how long. I've heard 500 years thrown around, but bare minimum, we know Endfield takes place 150 years after Arknights. So most of the original people the Reconveners are taking after had already passed, unless there's some long-living race like the vampires. But the Reconveners bring up an interesting question. If life can be assimilated into the Originium universe, and then brought out from it to interact with
If this is the case, and if the life can be basically replicated or simulated, I'm gonna bet my entire account that there's gonna be some huge ass villain that's gonna be like simulated as well and create some kind of havoc in the
real
universe.
space, does Priestess's motive hold more moral ground? My answer would still be no, because end of the day, the person you are is dying out and only a faraway echo is taking its place. But how Endfield handles this plot point I think is going to be very interesting with how it ties into Arknights. And I hope to see similar stuff like this in Endfield, because Arknights is already such a vast world, there is so much to explore. So seeing the concepts in it still hold weight in the world is nice. I don't think we need to go full sail in the direction of more Arknights lore, especially considering I believe Endfield was said to be a standalone game. But it's nice to see the lore of OG Arknights hasn't been thrown to the side. In fact, with how the lore in Endfield has been, it really seems like some problems on Terra are just gonna get ramped up to 100 on Talos too. And it ain't just those either. I mean, hell, there's also so many theories about the Agaloy having halos and how that relates to the Sanctum, especially after Master's travels. But I'm not going to get into all of that now, because if I throw too much information in this video, it'll kneecap itself by new players watching it and not being able to retain any of it. I wanted to avoid information overload, so I hope this explanation of the lore didn't hit that point. There's a lot I want to explain, but in explaining a lot, I would then explain fucking nothing. I pretty much just want y'all to have a basic understanding of the lore, because I'm thinking it's incredibly likely the points I discussed in this video will appear in Endfield, and if they don't, 3 years down the line, y'all could come back to this video and say I'm wrong, but I'm gonna put a lot of money on being right about this, and even if I'm not, hopefully the lore in this video was able to make you more interested in trying out Arknights, because I do believe that people trying out Endfield would still really enjoy getting into the story of Arknights. I think Endfield will be able to stand on its own, but knowing where this story started from will always add to the experience of it.
Well, I'm gonna be real, I had a little bit different expectations coming into this video, because this was way more detailed, way more profound than I ever could imagine, and I'm kinda having another Arknight headache. There are a lot of interesting theories and the lore's like overall, but also as it being said, I kinda feel like it would be such a great way to not continue with the original Arknight, but rather having like a stand-alone game, because if that's not gonna be the case, a lot of people would kind of feel urged to play the game just to know a little bit more about the lore, which I would say it could be a little bit unfair, but also at the same time it's also really nice to have as some similarities or like continuation from the original lore. And speaking about the lore, I would be really interested to see some, you know, let's say conflict or like potential war between the, let's say, observers, or some kind of battle between two entities in the Arknight Endfield, because in the original lore there's been a lot of really interesting and kind of very curious moments, like a fighting or the military moments, which would be also kind of interesting to going into the Endfield, but maybe it's a little bit too early for it and we just need to build up a little bit more context and the story. But overall, I cannot stop being amazed by how deep this lore of this entire universe can go, and I'm really excited to seeing a following patches to the game, hopefully revealing a little bit more plot twists, but even if that's not gonna be the case, I'll still gonna enjoy my factory. Anyway, really great video, hope you enjoyed, and maybe see you next time with more Endfield. Take care.